You're listening to the A to Z of Human Performance live show weekdays at 13:30 GMT with Chris Lissaman and resident expert Jonna Sercombe. Please enjoy responsibly. Hello, Chris.
Hello, we're back.
Indeed, Thursday. Is it Thursday today?
It is Thursday. It's our penultimate show.
We're joined by Steve.
We've got Steve in the house. Welcome, Steve. How are you doing?
Mr. Eaton.
How are you doing, Steve?
Good, thank you.
Good to have you. Good to have you back.
Star of stage and screen, Steve Eaton.
We've doubled up on our authors. Looking forward to the show today. We're going to be talking about Xenacious, which begins with an X. We've made it right the way through to X in our alphabet. We've just got one more show tomorrow, which is going to cover Y and Z. So we'll wrap up tomorrow. But first, Xenacious. What on earth does that mean, Jonna?
We have very limited choices. It was going to be X-ray or misspelled excellence, xylophone. No, we can't do that. Xenacious is a heartfelt yearning for change. And so we were discussing it a little bit just when we were writing the book, you know, what are the things that are important? And part of what's important is a bit of creativity, a bit of doing things differently, a bit of craziness. The chapter starts with that very famous quote. Do you know who this is by, Chris? Hang on. Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules. They have no respect for status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as crazy, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. Who's that by, Chris?
Rob Stilton, isn't it?
Yeah, everyone thinks it's from Steve Jobs.
But, I only know that because I got the book in front of me.
Oh, that's
a copy.
Yeah, Steve Jobs. the guys from the ad agency that were working for Apple wrote that for Steve Jobs, and he then gave it as one of his most famous keynote speeches. Available on YouTube.
Got to give the credit to the marketing agency there.
Always the marketing guy, isn't it, Chris?
Yeah. Got to give them credit.
Yeah. So yearning for change.
Right, yearning for change. So perhaps doing things a little bit differently, a little bit of craziness maybe. Steve, do we need a bit of craziness to be a high performer?
To be a high performer, yeah, I would say so. Yeah, I would say we all need a bit of craziness in our lives. I think it keeps things interesting and makes us human, I think. But yeah, certainly for those who know me, would say there's a little bit in there sometimes.
When have you had to do things differently, think outside the box, go a bit crazy?
Certainly, a lot of the time. Certainly in my military days, that was half of the interest. Really, was trying to think out of the box, trying to preempt other people's moves, other people's tactics. You know, so it was always. But I suppose in a considered way, which I suppose can fly in the face, I suppose, of doing things spontaneously or just for the crack of things. But certainly I've certainly been involved in both, but certainly my military involved a bit more planning or a bit more structure behind the scenes, which enabled you to then have moments where you could just be creative and
It's actually very interesting. I'm having a bit of a deep think about this, but it's a very interesting point you're making there, which is if you're a wise person, you normally would think about things beforehand. You've got some metacognition, you're kind of checking yourself to make sure your motives are right or other things. To really get off the leash and do something wild that's quite difficult, actually, isn't it? If you're a deep thinker, if you're like Chris was saying yesterday, he's quite, he's very strong values and therefore is going to consider things before he acts. But maybe that's the challenge for some of us who are tempted into this kind of well thought through life, grounded, prepared, planned. Actually, it's hard to sort of do something crazy.
And I think with experience, I would say it was, in my experience, it was much easier to do crazy, silly things when I was younger. And clearly we know from the science that actually, certainly young men are, we don't stop developing really until we're into our early 20s. And so before that, that's why, we're getting lots of chemicals released in the body. So we are natural risk takers.
Yeah.
So the opportunity to do silly things is always there with young men, certainly.
Yeah, the idea of being fueled by adrenaline, testosterone, and all the other feel-good hormones, it can make you feel invincible, can't it?
Yeah. And we're not just talking about the massively crazy moments, which, as you've said, I'm not likely to do. We're also talking about sort of low-level variance, just shaking things up, doing things slightly differently as well, aren't we, Jonna?
I think it's really important, and again, like, this is an aspect of high performance. A lot of what any of the high performers do is try and create a process that will deliver them with the results, and do so in quite a lot of detail to deliver them the results. And I do think that direction is kind of the foundational methods that high performers use to achieve results, is thinking about their outcomes, thinking about their process, thinking about how to optimize each step of that process. However, let's say you, who is it? Bradley Wiggins. Bradley Wiggins used the same time trial warm up for every time trial of his whole life. So he's got a process. It works for him, and he does that every race. I think that's actually really good, because it's a big moment. You've got an established system in play, and a big moment, don't change anything. But also, if you were to do the same workout every day for your time trial training for 365 days a year, it's going to become boring, and we're going to get diminishing returns, and we're also going to lose motivation if we're bored. So there's certain, in the book we write about big moments, which are an important one not to go crazy and do something different. There's a very long history of athletes at Olympics and other things, varying something the night before, changing some aspect of their kit, and then they've worked for 4 years and they just screw up their big race because they did something silly, because they were thinking, oh, this is really big, I've got to try and do something crazy here. But I do think we need that creativity to keep life interesting. I mean, we've seen it with lockdown. Tell me how boring it is. Eat, sleep, repeat.
Yeah.
You go grey in the end. So
those big moments, we need to keep things as they are. We don't want variance there. When should we be looking for variance?
Well, I'd say, in my opinion, those big moments. So again, I've seen this when we're doing a sales pitch. If we've got an established meeting process and sales pitch, most of the time I want to stick with that. A brand new client is not. I did once do a brand new style of pitch to a brand new client. It was a very big opportunity, but it didn't actually work that well. And so then I was left regretting what I'd done, because our pitch was in the end not effective. So what I should have done I should have tried that in a less important environment, maybe a smaller pitch, try the new presentation or the new meeting format there, rather than a big client. So there's no downsides to trying out a new pitch from time to time with a small client, but there's a huge downside to trying it out with a big client, which is what I would call a big moment. So there's those two, like a no downsides moment is where it doesn't really matter if you try something new. As an example, an athlete after Olympics, when they've won their gold medal, like go into your next Olympic cycle, it's the perfect time to try something new. You've got a world championships to go for. Like that next year is a good year for innovation. But as you approach the big moment, you want to kind of try and keep things under control.
What about you, Steve? What have your big moments been, or what big moments have you got coming up where you need to not vary your process, your methods?
Crikey, it's a question, isn't it? I think certainly in the current situation, it's going to be interesting. I think because I think we're all developing habits. Humans. Historically, we can be quite lazy in the fact that we'll learn a habit, we'll adapt a way of being that's good for the circumstances that we're in at the moment. But I think following lockdown, and moving into the future, it's going to be I think a lot of people are going to be finding it really interesting, breaking the shackles from what they've created now to survive and work effectively in the environment they're in. And then suddenly when we get this freedom, it's going to be really quite interesting. I think if from my perspective, with a bit of now with a bit of wisdom, I suppose, if I can call it that, I suppose it's in making some of these decisions, I can be very spontaneous, but I think a lot of the times as well now, because I have other things to consider, my choices are quite bound, if you like. There are, in the choices we make, as we cover in the book, there are sets of consequences, good and bad. You might get the consequence of doing something crazy, might be an incredible rush and just that's the best thing I've ever done. But the consequences might also be not as you'd hoped. And so this is where you got to consider, going back to that point that John has just raised about choosing your clients, doing a bit of a risk analysis, maybe, I don't know, maybe wisdom, but I think sometimes there is the joy of just going, wow, what the hell? But again, there are consequences with everything.
Yeah, and you'll have had to think through consequences on a significant level with your military background as well. I think that's perhaps where that sense comes from of not going too crazy and
definitely, and
taking on too much risk.
Yeah, and I think just adding on to Jonna's point there, it's these Bradley Wiggins, doing the same warm up each time within the military and within lots of organisations. We have standard operating procedures, so we know that when things get a bit tight, we will sort of default to things that we know that we're good at, that are stable and clear. Sorry, and it's interesting as well with within a team environment is knowing, and we've talked about this before, where people within a team know that actually that's what we're going to do as a team, or that's what Steve's going to do, or that's what John is going to do.
Yeah.
So
we need those processes as well, don't we?
But on the basis of those, wow, that hopefully is where you can do the basics. You feel safe in that environment. So feeling self and your confidence, that's when you can go, right, what else can we do, guys? I've got the confidence.
Yeah. It's interesting what you say about the impact on other people. I think, the craziness, as we've said, is helpful. It's a part of creativity, is a part of being human, but also we've got to think about whether we're trying to work with other people or whether we're trying to compete against them, for example. And, if you're doing marketing, then you're on one level trying to set up a process that's going to deliver you leads or business, but on another level, you're competing against your competitors' marketing teams, and therefore you might need to take risk and do creative that gets you, a better outcome, is less predictable. But I was thinking what you're saying there also about aligning a team. There's two examples of where I think creativity and craziness is helpful. One of which, just off the TV last night, I was interesting listening to Jonna Sercombe. His team scored nine goals again in their game against Southampton. Thank you. But he said afterwards, we've got a brilliant style of play now, but I'm still want the team to have enough variance that we don't become predictable. And basically, they've engineered a system that can create 9 goals, but because they've done it by a system, it becomes then predictable, and then ultimately it'll lose some of its power. People will work out how to counter that system. And it's very, very similar in poker. In poker, obviously you've got the cards and you've got the money. That's two components, and then you've got the other people. And poker is unlike chess. Poker has a human dimension. In chess, there is no human dimension. It's just problem solving. But in poker, you've got a human dimension because you've got bluffing. And one of the top female poker players is Liz Boree. She's an Oxford level mathematician. She's an absolute genius. And she's done a brilliant talk, actually, which is available on YouTube, The Science Behind Poker, about what poker players call game theory optimal poker. So GTO poker, game theory optimal, is where every single bet, every single raise you make, every single fold you make, every single bet you make, every single bluff you make is optimized by how likely it is to help you win. And if us three were playing poker and one of us was playing GTO poker, the thing about game theory optimized poker is you will win money. If you play game theory optimized, you will win money because you're playing the best play every time, and it's very hard to keep that up. But even with GTO poker, if I play Chris and he plays game theory optimized and I play game theory optimized, neither of us have got any winning potential. So at the end of a million hands of poker, we'd both have exactly the same amount of money we started with, which it blows my mind then that the scientifically and mathematically most accurate plays against an opposition doing the same thing will just neutralize both of us and neither of us will win. So therefore, in order to win against Chris, if he's playing game theory optimized poker, I have to play non-optimal poker in order to beat him. I also stand the chance of losing, right? But to create any kind of winning edge, I then would have to step away from the optimal playing style. And it just shows that even in extremely mathematical or scientific environments, that sometimes to succeed, you need variance, you need craziness, you need bluff or bluster that isn't actually scientifically or mathematically valid. And that's the human component. I'm thinking about fighting a battle now, Steve, or I'm sure football's similar, isn't it, with tactics and other things, but sometimes you just got to do something different that's unexpected.
It's a human element, isn't it? That means that is essential, because if it was robotic, like you're saying, if everything was mathematically calculated, that would work. But the fact that we're humans with emotions, and then like you say, you can bluff and lie and deceive, it adds a whole complexity to it that needs some craziness.
And there is a science to it, as well, that, humans, when we are stressed, we lose the ability to be creative. The blood is being sucked away from that front bit of the brain that gives us our ability to be creative and compassionate and all those good things, and problem solve. It all sits within the prefrontal cortex. So you're trying to get to a point where you are confident, you are not stressed to a degree that it's affecting your performance, but also in a point where you can be creative, and even in the most challenging environments, by maintaining that bit of confidence, and which is where the operating procedures come in. I've got something to fall back on if things go really bad. That gives you the confidence, you de-stress, and then you're able to be creative again or solve problems. So having the strategies to be slightly reckless, if you use those words, is a skill in itself, really, to do it and perform at the same time.
Do you think the stress that we feel will sometimes make us more crazy, sometimes make us do crazy things? It might limit our creativity, but also might make us do something different.
Is when you go into if you become too stressed, you'll go into the fight and flight mode.
Right.
Now, when you're into that position there, the body's not interested in trying to think around a problem. It's going to do one thing. It's going to run that way. It's going to freeze, or it's going to fight. And the problem is when, certainly in areas of the military where they're trying to encourage you to overcome increased threat levels against an enemy, for instance, then you can be hot-headed. And we see that shown in all sports, in all areas, in business where people make bad deals. They lose the ability to be creative. They panic. They don't feel safe anymore. They become overwhelmed and they make a bad decision. And that's often where you see people jumping out and doing something that was out of character, but it's just you're going into the fight mode, if you like, or you make a bad business decision because you're panicking and you can't deal with it, and you make a decision and it's the wrong decision.
But there are also, I totally agree, there are also those moments out there where there's no downside to any course of action. And you talked about fight, flight or freeze. I think many of us also get stuck. I'm thinking about some of my ski trips where, do you know what, every part of me wants to stay where I am, but you've got to push yourself and mentally override that feeling and say, no, I need to move on. I've got to get off this mountain. I've got to get out of this couloir. Or, let's say you're halfway down a very, very difficult run. Like every part of you is saying, actually, I want to stop now. But you've got to override that and say, no, I need to get to safety. Nathan, I'll tell you a funny story. Nathan and I were out skiing in Switzerland last year. It's around this time. And a blizzard started coming in, and we basically persuaded the people on the lifts to let us up the mountains for a couple more runs. So we got up once and came back down again, and it was kind of basically nearly a whiteout. And then like we said to the guy, one more, we're our last one. He's like, it's shut, guys. Like, oh, please, one more. It's still running. And he let us back up, and then we got to the top, and it was absolutely, completely white, completely impossible to see where we're going. Couldn't see the slope, couldn't differentiate between the sky and the ground, nothing. And we're like, oh God, why did we do this? And we just said to each other, right, let's go down really carefully and really, find our way. Let's not ski off the edge of a cliff. Let's not hit a jump or a run. Anyway, about halfway down this run, we bumped into a mum with 2 children under 5 on the same slope as us. And we were suddenly, oh, hey guys, are you okay? Everything all right here? We just flipped, because we flipped into like, we're fine, everything's all right with us. 10 meters before, we'd been terrified. But like suddenly we saw someone who's vulnerable or who we thought we might have to help. It's like, oh yeah, you okay? She said, oh yeah, I'm just here with these kids, and there's a couple more further down. I'm just bringing them down. A bit of help would be great. But like we then went into a very different headspace, and it was interesting the difference between a stress reaction and like the chemicals we got when we needed to help. We suddenly felt energized rather than feeling sorry for ourselves or in the kind of defensive mode. But I was interested in the brain chemistry going on there when I reflected on that, and how suddenly needing to help someone else gave us an absolutely massive adrenaline boost or whatever, Steve? Or were we just too embarrassed? I don't know.
Well, I would say that you were clearly in a balance, that when you came across it, you were able to move into the big, because you lose the ability to be compassionate when you are in that fight and flight. The body's not interested in it, so you must have sort of been in the crossover area between being one of you anyway must have been in the area of going, well, oh crikey, there's something that can distract us, and
Yeah, I did actually.
let's go and help those people, and but it's also part of your makeup as well. For some people, they're able to do that. Others would be quite happy going, no, I'm sod them, it's their fault down there. So
I've followed Nim's Purger and his Everest climbing, and he's often criticised for using oxygen. And all the mountaineers who say, oh, you've got to do it, he said, without oxygen. And he says, well, no, because I'm using oxygen, I might be able to save someone. And multiple times come across people who their own colleagues who they were climbing with, their teammates couldn't get them down, but because he's using oxygen, he's got just a bit of extra strength to try and get them off the mountain. But I think that's again, it's a kind of a different way of thinking about craziness. Like the mountaineers are saying, well, you're crazy, you're using oxygen and it's helping you. He's saying, well, you're crazy, you're not using it, you could help someone else. So yeah.
But it's down to those personal values, isn't it? Values and beliefs, which are absolutely crucial to
and lots of moments, to be honest, when like that family that you would help skiing in those treacherous conditions might seem, a moment of compassion might seem crazy to some people, and that's why they're rare, aren't they? When you get that random act of kindness or unexpected compassion, that's they're their own unique moments of craziness, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think it can also help you realize that. I mean, I was thinking another one, which is taking risks in a downturn. I'm a lot of people have got their finances at the moment are stretched for whatever reason, or businesses that are not doing their revenue or whatever it might be. There are some moments where there's no downsides to taking a bit of risk. And let's say you're lost in the middle of a desert and you don't know which way's home. I mean, you could just sit there, couldn't you? But it might also just be pick any direction and start walking. I know Steve will tell me that if you do it without a compass, you'll start walking around in a circle. But there are moments in life. I remember in March last year when we didn't know whether our business would survive or not. Okay, doing nothing is not an option. It doesn't matter what we do. If we make mistakes here, that's absolutely fine. If things go wrong, that's fine. If we end up upsetting clients or losing business because we've tried to do something, anything is better than just sitting there and saying, well, let's see what happens. There's nothing we can do. We won't try anything. It's a stressful time. So we decided to keep taking risks, didn't we, Chris, and keep pushing forward on things. And I think that's also good for us in terms of reinforcing our agency as a human being, that we can be active at taking our destiny in our own hands. Yeah.
So we got those big moments where we shouldn't change, shouldn't vary, because it's a big moment and we need to be consistent. The cliffhangers where we really need to change something because we're in danger, and the no downsides where staying as we are is going to do nothing.
If you're on a losing streak, you should change something, shouldn't you? If you're in there's no downsides, and I guess it's also like, say, in relationships, if you're having difficulty in a relationship, well, if it's going off track anyway, try changing something. It doesn't matter what, do it. Try anything. See where you can get to. There's a bit of risk taking and kind of craziness, I think, welcome, and if you can get used to it, it feels great because you recognize those moments and think, oh yeah, it doesn't matter what we do here, so let's do what we think is going to work.
What about some habituators then? What kind of things can we do to improve our Xenacious?
Well, I think to start with, I think just as we've said earlier on today, that the kind of craziness is counter to almost everything else that we've got in the high performance book, which is all about working out how to be consistently good, managing things in a sensible way, being in control, being proactive, assertive. I do think having a really good range of skills and building up your skills is obviously a great platform for creativity. But one small experiment you could do is experimenting with your yeses and nos. That's in the habituators. So say no to something you'd normally say yes to. Say yes to something you'd normally say no to. And just see what happens. it's very interesting how programmatized. Steve was actually just saying about his commitments, right, Steve? You've got all your commitments. You've worked out all your yeses and nos and what you can or should or shouldn't do. Maybe just play around with those boundaries of what in a legal way, ethical and legal way. But maybe just say yes to something that you might normally say no to. What would you normally say no to, Chris?
That's a good tip. What would I normally say no to? I'm thinking of where friends have invited me to do a hobby that's their hobby, that's not my hobby. And you're tempted to say no. Sorry?
You want to go cycling with me one day?
I've got to say yes now, haven't I?
Yeah, you never know what's going to happen though, do you?
No. And that's why you would do it, wouldn't it? It's a new experience. It's a variance that there's no downsides in that case.
Steve said yes to a lot of other people's challenges, don't you, Steve, to help support them? You said that before.
Not many. One too many, but yes. Yeah.
But other people are a great source of this variance, aren't they?
Yeah.
What the other thing I think is to think about to use your creativity and imagine some adventures you'd like to have. I know, Chris, you've moved to Dorking. That was a big adventure.
It was, yeah.
Buying a house, do you want to have that adventure?
That's hopefully coming soon.
Yeah, that's good. That's another great adventure. But there's all these adventures to have, aren't there? Places to visit, skills to learn. Maybe we were talking the other day. Maybe a career change that you're not expecting is a huge thing to say yes to. When it would be very safe to say no. One of my great friends is a psychiatrist and great secure NHS job, and everything. Hang on for another 10 years and get a great pension. But she had it in her that she wanted to go on to a new adventure, and so she took the risk of saying no to her safety and went off to do something risky. And she had a brilliant time and a very energizing 10 years more of work she had that she might not otherwise have had.
Yeah, that's great. We're just a few minutes out. Any other tips for us on this chapter?
What should we do to be more crazy, Steve? Write a book? Star in a show?
Definitely not star in a show.
Star radio show.
I think an important point though in going off, and looking at these new things. Personally, I think there's the whole point around how you look at it. How whether you see it as a challenge or a threat. And I know it's probably mentioned in the book, but I think if you're going to accept something, accept it in the mind that there's a possibility that you're going to learn something, and possibly you're going to enjoy it. Possibility you might not enjoy it, but at least you're going to learn something along the way. Because we know that if you go into something with a bit too much trepidation, you're not going to get the whole deal, because you're going to be guarded. You're not going to have that experience where you're going to get the whole experience, which I think, be open to learning. God, the mistakes that I've made along the way and the bad decisions, but you don't always get it right. We're humans, so just take it, learn from it, move on.
That's the insurance policy, right? Isn't it as well? We can take these risks knowing that we definitely will learn something. I think your point about taking on challenges with the right mindset is, and when we're in a good place to get the best out of it, even if we fail, is fundamental. That protects us and our sense of identity. And you see people that, especially on the business side, I don't know if it's similar on the military side, but on the business side, you see people that put their identity too much into whether their thing is a success or failure. And then, not all businesses succeed, and then it does fail, and then they're devastated. But other people are able to do that same kind of risk, but without it having a big emotional impact on them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's time to wrap up the show. Thank you, Steve and Jonna, for joining me. And I will see you tomorrow for our final show.
Final show.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Jonna.